Okay, the second most important thing, or the second aspect of the second essay in Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals, has to do with bad conscience or guilt, or just what we might call conscience. Now, Freud took this right out of Nietzsche. He writes about conscience, among other places, in his book Civilizations and Its Discontent. Essentially, Nietzsche says conscience comes from this. That is, when we feel guilt, what is the origin of that? What's the origin of guilt? Nietzsche says very clearly human beings are violent, we're cruel, but we come into society where it's not necessarily acceptable to always purge our violent urges. We have a lust for blood. What do we do with that lust for blood? Well, when we can't vent it externally, we revert it back upon ourselves. That's where conscience comes from. We essentially torture ourselves. If we can't torture other people, we torture ourselves. If we can't inflict pain on other people, we inflict it on ourselves. That's the origin of conscience, or bad conscience for Nietzsche, or guilt. It comes from the need for pain, the need for inflicting punishment. When there's no one else to punish because we've come into society, we punish ourselves. We turn that violent urge inward. It's on page 84 of your text, section 16 of essay 2. I regard the bad conscience as the serious illness that human beings were bound to contract under the stress of the most fundamental change they ever experienced. That change which occurred when man found himself finally enclosed within the walls of society and of peace. Suddenly, all their instincts were disvalued and suspended. I believe, skipping down a little bit, there has never been such a feeling of misery on earth, such a laden discomfort. And at the same time, the old instincts had not suddenly ceased to make their unusual demands, only it was hardly or rarely possible to humor them. As a rule, they had to seek new and, as it were, subterranean gratifications. In other words, they had to go inward. All instincts that do not discharge themselves outwardly turn inward. This is what I call the internalization of man. Thus it was that man first developed what he later called his soul. The entire inner world, originally as thin as if it were stretched between two membranes, expanded and extended itself, acquired depth, breadth, and height in the same measure as outward discharge was inhibited. So again, conscience results from our coming into society, our inability to express those, our bestial and animalistic desires outwardly, these violent desires, because they're not acceptable. So what do? We turn them inward upon ourselves, and boom, there's something like conscience.